Welcome, everyone. First, we want to congratulate those of you that are here because you were selected, and welcome to our state agency LWCF applicants as well. My name is Kyle Bolin. I am the supervisor of this program and the National Park Service Unit with California State Parks Office of Grants and Local Services. Before our team introduces themselves, I want to let you know how excited we are to have a new standalone NPS unit in the Office of Grants and Local Services. This new team will handle all NPS programs, including Land and Water Conservation Fund, ORLIP, and REPI, from the time you're preparing an initial application, scoring, federal requirements, administration of the grant to construct, renovate, or purchase your park, and through the compliance phase that lasts in perpetuity. We like to call this the cradle to grave process. I'd like to have all of our presenters who are going to be presenting today to introduce themselves. You guys want to go ahead and turn on your cameras, and we'll start with Natalie.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Natalie B., and I'm a manager in the Office of Grants and Local Services. I recently, in the fall of last year, now moved into a different realm of the Office of Grants and Local Services. So I'm in the policy and operations section, but prior to that, for the last 5 years, I was the Land and Water and Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership, or LIP, program supervisor as well. So I'm here. I'm going to be helping out with the chat today and answering any questions out loud, but I'll hand it back over to Sochi, who is, this is going to be the National Park Service unit in our office. Will introduce themselves next. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Natalie. I'm Sochi Prat, the NPS unit manager. I'll go ahead and be presenting in this presentation later on as well, and managing the LWCF email in case there are any technical issues behind the scenes. But remember, the chat is for your questions. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Katie Valaire.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Katie Valaire. I am the Senior Environmental Planner for our NPS unit in our office, and I'm here to ensure your project complies with Section 106. And I'll hand it to Kristen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen White. I'm an environmental scientist, and I will be reviewing the CEQA and NEPA portions of your project. And I'll hand it over to Katie Freeling.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Freeling, and I'm our project officer for our Southern California programs. Really excited to start working with you all, and I will be managing our screen share today. Gonna hand it off to Katie Bush.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Bush, and I'm the project officer for Northern California, and I'll be doing some behind-the-scenes work today, as well as presenting in part. I'll pass it off to Lydia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lydia Willett, and I'm another Associate Project Officer with the Grants of Local Service in the new NPS unit. And I am going to be taking care of Central California region. And I am also monitoring the chat today for technical issues and providing links for your reference. Nice to meet everyone.
Awesome. So now that you've met our new project officers and they've introduced themselves and their regions, you might be wondering where your county falls within those regions and who your project officer is. We're going to take a look at our website. There's a link on our website so that you can find the project officers by county. It's on the right-hand side of most of our websites. And so as you'll see here, there is 2 columns. These are the current 2 columns, and there's going to be a 3rd column off to the right-hand side in the future. We just have to get that new, our new spreadsheet's got to go through some remediation, and then it'll be available this week. So as you'll see, there's a green column that's for competitive applications. The pink column is for the grant administration. And then off to the right of that, there's going to be a new column that is going to have all of our project officers by county. So what you would do is you would find the county that the project site is located in on the left-hand side and go over to the far right where our new column is for our NPS unit. And that'll be your contact for anything related for any of the NPS programs, including Land and Water Conservation Fund, the ORLIP program, as well as REPI. And that it will have the project officer's name and also their email and phone number Also, the project officers today are going to, after this workshop, just send a little introduction email to you so that you do have their contact information moving forward. With that, this workshop is also going to be recorded. It's going to be posted on our LWCF webpage shortly. So you guys are going to be using the chat feature to ask questions during the webinar. Katie is circling where you can find that chat feature. Now, if you can't find the chat feature, the best thing to do is try exiting the workshop, then coming back in the workshop, and that usually fixes everything. Now, if that doesn't work, you can email our email lwcf@parks.ca.gov. Lydia's going to throw that in the chat for you guys. If you have any questions or technical issues, please email that and we can help you out with that. So at the end of each section, we'll be taking some time to answer questions related to this section just covered. We'll have time at the end to answer questions that are missed, or if you want to ask your questions out loud, that's going to be the time to do that, is at the very end. So as we answer these questions directly in the chat, you're going to see some icons such as a ship, fire, a party hat, or eyes next to your question. This is just our way of communicating with each other internally as to who's going to be responding to your questions. So we're here to help. We love answering questions. If after the workshop you have additional questions, we'll be available via email, phone, or a scheduled Teams meeting to go over more in-depth questions you may have on your specific project. With that, let's take a look at our agenda. Perfect. So we're going to go through all post-selection federal requirements in this workshop. This includes a series of required forms and processes, including the application and revision, or A&R form, environmental requirements, historical requirements, including section 106, the LWCF boundary map, and uniform appraisal standards for federal land acquisition documentation, or Yellow Book standards, and that's for acquisitions only. So with that, let's take a look at the timeline. Thank you, Katie. So as you see, we are here in the yellow section, winter 23-24. The department announced the awarded and recommended projects, and we have the post-selection federal requirements workshop. So below that, you're going to see spring 2024. So this is for projects that want to start this year, 2024. The last opportunity to submit the federal requirements to us. So section 106 is got to be submitted by April, and the A&R form and the boundary map by the end of May. So if you move fast, you can start this year with that May 15 deadline for the submittal. If you need more time, next year is going to be your soonest start date. If you get your federal requirements to us by, as we talked, section 106 by April, it gives us time to get everything in order, and then we submit it to NPS by June 15th for their review. And then we submit the federal requirements officially to NPS in July, and that would lead to a earliest start date would be the end of September. So if you do miss that May window, we encourage you to continue to work on your project. We'll continue to accept the federal requirement documents and review them on a flow basis. We'll be submitting to NPS. However, the next NPS cycle is going to be for like an opportunity for funding would be spring of 2025. And then you have up to 3 years from the date that the NPS funding approval. That's how long you have to do the construction of the project. Now, also, so the documents that we're going to be covering today, they're going to be submitted into our new SharePoint site, which can accommodate large files and large documents. It's brand new, so it is being developed right now. We'll be sending out an email with directions on how to use that, as well as a video on how to use that in the next couple of weeks. This is just going to be where you're going to put all post-selection federal requirements. You're going to have an individual folder that only you, your agency, can access for the federal requirement documents, and also another one for your section 106 documents. And so this is going to have everything like that. It's going to have where you're going to submit your documents, but it's also going to have templates for your for you to use, and then also other technical assistance documents. All right. So moving on, we are excited to talk about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And, you know, for short, we're going to call this LWCF. The workshop's going to provide guidance on completing all this post-selection federal requirements. So we're going to start with the A&R form. So today we're going to go over each section of the A&R form, providing additional detail on areas NPS has given us feedback on previously and answering questions in the chat as we go. When filling out this form, we recommend keeping responses brief and completely project specific. NPS requests that the form only refers to the project components and plans proposed in your application. For instance, if you have a previous or a future phase for the additional work planned for your project site outside of the LWCF funding plus match, please refrain from discussing it in responses. In fact, we prefer applicants do not use the term phase at all. So it tends to raise additional questions by the NPS team about timing and how it relates to environmental work that is required. So if your total project scope elements identified in your budget narrative is 10 million for elements XYZ, please keep your responses in the A&R form strictly to the elements of X, Y, and Z. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat. I'm going to hand it over to Sochi.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kyle. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right into the form, and we're going to start off with the form's organization. You'll notice that first is a cover page, and it's followed by 4 main sections. Not every section or question applies to every application. So we're going to go ahead and go through each section in detail in this training. So let's go ahead and provide a brief orientation of the layout. Let's go ahead and go over section 1. That's a new project grant application. And this covers some basic information about the project and project selection. All applicants will fill out this portion of this section. Section 2 includes site-based project grants. This covers more detailed information about proposed projects. Section 2 also has 2 subsections. Section 2.1, which is for acquisitions, and Section 2.2, which is for development projects only. Section 3, site information. This covers general site accessibility and ownership questions, as well as environmental resources survey. All applicants will respond to all of the questions in these sections. So section 3.0.C, the environmental resources survey is a key section in this form. In this section, NPS uses, in conjunction with the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA, these documents. And to determine whether a project already complies with the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA, or needs additional action in order to comply. So we're going to go over all of these sections in detail today. Section 4 is for the amendments, and this covers changes to the scope or cost for awarded projects. So leave this blank because this is after the fact. Let's go ahead and bring up the A&R form and take a closer look at the cover page. We've highlighted the fields that you will be filling out. Okay, so on the cover page, fill out the project name under grant name, and it should be the same name used throughout the application for your project. Leave the project numbers blank, and then check the boxes that apply to your grant. All applicants will select either new project grant application, and then select whether it's an acquisition or development. The third box, it's a combination acquisition and development. It's not used for California grants, so please skip this. The rest of the boxes in this section don't apply to your grant at this time, so skip these for now too. The next thing you'll do is add a brief description of the proposal at the bottom of this cover page. This should only be 1 to 2 sentences. It's your scope statement. Okay, so go ahead and please add any questions in the chat feature, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kyle.
Thank you, Sochi. So after the cover page, we have section 1.0, new project grant application. As we move through the form, you'll see sections highlighted in color. We saw on that first page, there was a lot of yellow. So yellow is to be completed by all applicants. Green is going to be for acquisition projects, and then blue is for development projects. And if you see something that's not highlighted, you're going to leave those sections blank. So this is page 2. We see no highlight. So you're going to leave the new project contact info and attachment checklist blank. We're going to fill this out prior to submitting the application packet. So moving on to page 3. OGALs, we're going to fill out the question for B1. As you see, no highlight, so leave it blank. And then if we get down here, we're at B2, we see the yellow highlight. So everybody's going to answer B2. Using the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, SCORP, information included with your application. So the SCORP priorities can be found at parksforcalifornia.org. Under the SCORP tab, then 2021, 2025 SCORP report. We're going to post a link in the chat for your reference. Again, as a reminder, please keep this specific to the elements that pertain to this project, not previous or future phases. And also, you can look in your application that was submitted. It does have SCORP priorities that you already listed in your application, which can be then used here. So moving on, OGALs, we're going to complete section C, risk assessment. You're going to provide a response to all of D, financial. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. The next is moving on to section 2, site-based project grants. This starts on page 4. All applicants will fill out section 2.0, A and B. We don't use co-sponsors, so applicants should just include one contact person within the applicant organization, which NPS refers to as the subrecipient. Moving on to page 5, we'll see the green highlight. Acquisition project applicants will fill out section 2.1, respond to every question. If a question does not apply to your project, write in A. Under the parcel table, leave the check boxes regarding review of the appraisal in the signature section blank for OGALs to use. So we're going to scroll to page 6, and we're looking 2.1. So in addition to 2.1, an appraisal that conforms to the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisition, USFLA, or Yellow Book standards, and which has been vetted through our office, will be required prior to submitting the first payment reimbursement request. We're going to really dig into this requirement a bit further on at the end of this workshop. So development projects will fill out section 2.2 on page 7. Respond to every question. If a question does not apply to the project, write NA. Keep responses focused on the current project, not future phases, remember. And let us know if you have any questions on what should be included. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat feature, and I'm going to hand it back over to Sochi.
Thank you, Kyle. Okay, let's go ahead and dig into section 3, the site information. This begins on page 8. So all applicants are going to fill out section 3, A, B, and C. This section is primarily about the site layout, ownership, and environmental components. Section 3A, basic information, is relatively straightforward and includes questions on the current site conditions. Section 3B, which is on page 9, stewardship considerations. This information requests on any other rights or interests in the property. It's important that answers show here that the site will be primarily available for recreation and that any other rights and interests will not detract from that use. Please describe each additional right or interest in the property. Any items mentioned here should also be shown on the LWCF boundary map, and it should be in purple, and any items shown in purple on the map should be listed here. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kristen Way, who is our office NEPA and CEQA expert, and she's going to go ahead and guide you through the environmental process.
Thank you, Sochi. All right, so for section 3C on page 10, this focuses on environmental resources. NPS will use this section along with any documentation to determine whether sufficient environmental review has occurred on the federal level. Although the opening paragraph mentions consultation with MPS, in general, MPS asks that applicants work with OGALs on all application materials, including NEPA questions. This section needs to be completed in order for NPS to determine whether additional environmental review is needed. If NPS's compliance team has substantial additional questions on your project's environmental review process based on your submitted A&R form, we may schedule a time to discuss the project with OGALs, the applicant, and NPS all present. Generally, however, applicants will fill out this form, provide highlighted CEQA documents, which I'll talk about more in a couple of minutes, and then respond to a few additional questions from NPS via email as necessary prior to receiving NPS concurrence. For Table 1, you will assess how the project will affect various resources. Indicate positive impacts for all positive or neutral resource impacts, and indicate negative impacts where the resource will be permanently and adversely impacted. Indicate question mark or unknown only if there is an ongoing environmental study and the full impacts of the project for that resource are unknown. Please note that the question mark signifies that additional work by the applicant is being done or will be done prior to starting construction on the project. If a project is not found on site, applicants can leave it blank and include a note at the bottom of the table. For example, if the project is inland and coastal resources are not applicable, the applicant would leave item 18 blank and note at the bottom, item 18 is not marked as there are no coastal resources within or near the project site. All right, so on table 2 for page 11, this asks applicants to address the possibility of significant or controversial effects that the project may have. The document indicates that if the answer to any of these items is yes or unknown, an EA or EIS needs to be prepared. If your project involves a yes or question mark to any of these questions, please reach out to me, Kristen Way, to discuss next steps as soon as possible. And if you have any questions about these two tables, please put them in the chat. After these two tables, there are 5 additional environmental questions. On page 12, question 1 asks if there have been any NEPA or SEPA documents prepared. SEPA is the blanket acronym for a state's program, and for us, this signifies CEQA. Every project should have a yes here, as all projects have relevant CEQA documents, even if that document is a notice of exemption or NOE. For projects with an initial study or EAR, please summarize the findings and include page numbers where each item can be found. In addition to the summary, NPS has started to request that relevant sections associated with Table 1 resources and Table 2 questions be highlighted in the CEQA documents. If extensive environmental documents are not highlighted, NPS has returned the project pending the highlighting, which can sometimes cause significant delays to project review and approval. Also, for projects that have utilized CEQA documents that cover a project area greater than what may be federally funded, or if the CEQA document covers more than one project, please highlight the sections that specifically analyze the LWCF area. Question 2 asks that the applicant explain any negative or unknown impacts identified in Table 1, but additionally, NPS has started to ask for a discussion of all resource impacts from Table 1 for applicants that do not have land and water project-specific CEQA document and analyses. So these are typically requested for development projects that have an NOE and no additional environmental studies completed, or for projects that have utilized a CEQA document that covers an area much larger than the LWCF area, like general plans or certain EIRs. If you believe that your project may fit into one of these categories, we highly recommend you provide a discussion of all resources, but we can also talk offline about the necessity of this evaluation for your specific project. If you do provide this evaluation, each discussion of a resource should have at least a couple of sentences addressing the current condition of the resource in the project area and the project's potential impact. You can provide this evaluation within question 2 or as a separate document. And after this training, I will send out a template for the environmental evaluation document if you would like to use that format. For question 3, if the project has additional studies done that were not attached to the original CEQA documents, please also reference them here and provide them for review, such as the biological report. Question 4 is regarding the qualifications of the contributors for this section. You can include the names and agencies of those who created the CEQA documents, as well as whoever filled out the table and answered the questions above. If you have any questions on the first 4 questions that I went over, please put them in the chat. For question 5, if there are pending permits, NPS will likely also ask for a timeline of each one. You can help speed up the review of your application by including not only the permits needed, but the expected timeline to completion for any that are pending. Additionally, this project will be reviewed for compliance with the Endangered Species Act. If you believe or it is indicated in your CEQA document or biological report that a federally listed species may be impacted by the project, please notify me so we can coordinate with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to determine if consultations are required. Consultations can take anywhere from 3 to 8 months, depending on the impact of the project and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's workload. All right, and the last item under Section 3C is regarding NEPA. The NEPA pathway recommendation requests either a categorical exclusion or CE code or indication that an environmental assessment, EA, or an environmental impact statement, EIS, needs to be prepared. The list of categorical exclusions NPS uses can be found on our LWCF page, link will be in chat, or in the NEPA handbook, pages 33 through 38. When completing this section, CEQA knowledgeable staff should use this list to determine whether any of these CEs would be a good fit for the project. If you're not entirely sure, select the one you believe will be the best fit, and NPS can provide feedback during the review process on whether it applies. NPS will also give applicants a chance to select an alternate CE if they believe there is a better fit. Ultimately, though, it is up to NPS to determine if additional NEPA documents like an EA or an EIS needs to be prepared. And since their decision heavily relies on the information you give in Section 3C and in additional documents you provide, like the CEQA document or biological reports, I just want to emphasize one last time the importance of providing project-specific analysis for the resources listed in Table 1. All right, as mentioned before, in the A&R form, there is a reference to attaching documentation of NPS concurrence. Don't worry about that at this point. Once NPS has reviewed this section and supporting documents and approved them, they will provide the NEPA concurrence. Because NPS may ask for consultations or the preparation of a NEPA document based on this section, it would be helpful if you could provide this information for the section as soon as you can to help ensure that the project will spend the least amount of time and review as necessary. Since the environmental section is just one small part of the A&R form, you can email this section on a flow basis or send it into the SharePoint once we have that up and running to ensure that your application is processed as efficiently as possible. I don't need the rest of the A&R form completed to start the environmental review process. Right? Are there any specific questions for me currently? If so, you can put them in the chat, and I'll tag your name in the response if I respond in chat.
Yeah, Kristen, there is one about the typical timeline to complete the NEPA review process, but I'll let you go ahead and either you can address it out loud or go ahead and put it in the chat. So it's from, oh, I just lost it.
Oh, I think I see it.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, yeah,
Scroll
so the typical timeline is dependent on the impacts of your project. So for a project, for instance, that is surrounded by urban land and is an existing park, you know, we don't expect as many problems. So once you submit that information, the process is relatively fast. If there are consultations needed, or if there's a document that needs to be prepared, that's when the timeline can move to 3 to 8 months. So it's really project specific. If you would like to discuss the timeline, I will be sending the email afterwards, and we can set up a meeting to talk about your specific project. Are there any other questions?
I don't see any at this time, Kristen. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And if you think of any questions later, after this workshop is over, please feel free to contact me, Kristen Way, by email or phone, which will be in the chat. There is one additional subsection for section 3, which is section 3D, the Cultural and Historic Resources Review. Section 3D is informed by the completion of section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So I will now hand it over to Katie Valere, our office's section 106 specialist, who will help guide you through the process.
Thank you, Kristen. So on behalf of the National Park Service, I'm responsible for consulting with the State Historic Preservation Officer, referred to as the SHPO, to ensure all the LWCF and ORLIT projects comply with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So I'll be working closely with all of you. The Section 106 process can take several months or more to complete. A SHPO concurrence letter is required as part of the package submittal to NPS. Construction, landscaping, grading, or any ground disturbing activities cannot be started until funding is obligated by NPS, which marks the project's start date. Today, I'm going to go over the Section 106 process. If you have a question, we want to encourage you to use the chat, as others may have similar questions. I will address questions at the end of the meeting or at the end of the section, so you can contact me by email or phone as well. I am also available to schedule Teams meetings to go over more in-depth questions you may have on your project. So I want to point out that what I'm about to present is quite technical. My goal is to provide as much detailed information and guidance as possible so you and your consultant can reference the recording in the future if needed. Section 106 is triggered when a federal agency carries out, assists, funds, permits, licenses, or approves a project. The goal of the Section 106 process is to first identify and then avoid, minimize, or mitigate adverse effects to historic properties. Section 106's implementing regulations are set forth in the Code of Federal Regulations at Title 36, Part 800. Carrying out the Section 106 process may differ slightly depending on the federal lead agency's internal processes, the specific permitting or funding program, or other factors such as executed agreement documents. As I mentioned previously, my job is to work with you and your consultant to ensure your LWCF project complies with Section 106 on behalf of the National Park Service, which is the federal lead agency for the LWCF program. OGALS has prepared Section 106 procedure guidelines to assist applicants with the Section 106 process. The procedures are on the screen now. Please note these guidelines are specifically for the LWCF and ORLIT programs and are the result of consultation with the Office of Historic Preservation. I've already completed step 1 in the procedure guidelines, but please let me know in the chat if you have not received an email from me sent between December 18th and 22nd of 2023. My email included a copy of the guidelines, but they are also located on the Land and Water Conservation Fund application process webpage. And we're going to put a link in the chat for your convenience. So I'm going to hand it over to our Northern California Project Officer, Katie Bush, who will present steps 2 through 4 of OGALS' Section 106 procedure guidelines.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so step 2 is involves consulting with the California Native American Heritage Commission, also called the NAHC. This step is the applicant's responsibility, but if you already have a consultant, they may complete this for you. OGALS strongly encourages you to start this process immediately, as it can sometimes take months to receive a response from the NAHC, then months to receive a response from potentially interested tribal parties. On the screen is the NAHC's Sacred Lands file and Native American contact form. In Katie Valere's email to all applicants, she provided a copy of this form for your convenience. Once completed, submit it to the email address included at the top of the form. Once you receive a list of tribal representatives from the NAHC, you must send a letter to each tribal representative on the list by mail or email. It is very important to make sure that each representative is contacted and provided an opportunity to consult on the proposed project. If you already have a working relationship with a tribal representative that is not on the NAHC list, you may contact them in addition to the tribal representatives on the list. SHPO, or the State Historic Preservation Officer, will comment if a representative on the NAHC list has not been contacted. If there is no response from the contacts on your list, follow up with a phone call or email and make sure to document each attempt on a tribal consultation log. You'll need to include a log in all documentation of consultation as part of your tribal consultation package to SHPO. If you have already conducted tribal consultation as part of your CEQA effort for the project, please contact Katie Valere to discuss if this step can be abbreviated. If there's any questions about contacting NAHC or tribal representatives, you can go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll move on to step 3. Alrighty, thank you. Okay, so this step is a 2-part step for the applicant. Please review the Office of Historic Preservation Section 106 Submission Checklist for Federal Agency Compliance, which we just put in the chat. The checklist outlines SHPO's expectation for the Section 106 process and requirements. We have included a link in the chat, and Katie Valere will email everyone in this workshop a copy and a follow-up email. It will be very important for you to understand this process. Applicants will need to hire a consultant that meets the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards for archaeology at a minimum. If built environment resource types are identified in your project area, you may also need a consultant that meets the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards in a history or architectural history. If the person is not qualified or a consultant is selected that is not well versed and experienced in Section 106 and National Register evaluations, it can end up being more costly and cause undue delays in completing Section 106 and then receiving concurrence from the SHPO. We've posted a link in the chat where you can reference the NPS professional qualification standards for reference. The Office of Historic Preservation also maintains an Excel list of consultants that can be accessed through a link near the bottom of the California Historical Resources Information System website. Katie Freeling's taking us there quickly on the screen share. We have also included a link to the website in the chat so you can follow along. Please note that the consultants list is maintained by the Eastern Information Center, and OGALS is not endorsing nor guaranteeing the consultants on the list are qualified to perform Section 106. It's very important, and it is the responsibility of the applicant to determine if the consultant meets the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards. Now we'll go ahead and move on to step 4. For the LWCF program, the Office of Historic Preservation will expect 2 distinct consultation letters. The first consultation is the Area of Potential Effect Transmittal Letter. The Area of Potential Effect, or APE, is a legal term defined in the Section 106 regulations. The regulations provide SHPO the opportunity to comment on the delineation of the APE. The APE transmittal letter must include a detailed project description, an explanation on how the APE was delineated, a location map, and an APE map. The APE description needs to include the horizontal and vertical extents of the proposed work, including locations such as construction staging areas, access routes, and borrow and disposal areas. The APE should also take into account any potential indirect effects to historic property, such as visual and auditory effects, land use changes, traffic patterns, public access, etc., that would result from the proposed project. If your proposed project includes ground disturbing work, which most of you on the call today are planning to do, make sure to also describe in your narrative what the proposed maximum length, maximum width, and maximum depth of ground disturbing activity will be for each element proposed. Please also add the maximum height description. Think of this as a 3D project. Katie Valere will be sending you an APE letter template in the next few weeks that includes an example of how you should convey this information. Please use this letter template as your guide. Upon completion, send the APE letter back to Katie Valere in Word format along with the project location map and the APE map. So on screen is the example of a location map. The location map should depict the APE boundaries on the appropriate 7.5 minute USGS topographic quadrangle at an appropriate scale to show where the APE is located in your region. Now here's the example of an APE map. The APE map should include the APE boundary and project plans or details on an aerial base. More than one map page can be submitted if necessary. Please make sure to label all project elements discussed in the project description on the APE map. Katie Valere will email examples of these maps to you within the next couple of weeks. If there's any questions about step 3 or 4, please go ahead and write them into the chat and we will answer them as we can. I'll now hand it back over to Katie Valere to finish up this section with steps 5 through 7 of OGAL's Section 106 procedure guidelines.
Thanks so much, Katie. Okay, step 5. Once you submit the APE letter and the map to me, I will review the package and provide comments if necessary. When it's complete, I'll send the APE package to the Office of Historic Preservation. SHPO will have 30 days to review the package and provide comments on the adequacy of your APE. When I receive a response from SHPO, I will forward a copy of the letter to you for your records. Step 6. At this point in the process, your consultant will need to conduct a good faith effort to identify any cultural resources in the APE that may meet the definition of a historic property under Section 106. Section 4 in the OHP's Section 106 submission checklist provides an excellent summary of what SHPO will expect as part of the identification effort. As a reminder, we included a link to the Section 106 submission checklist in the meeting chat feature. The bullet points in step 6 of the OGAL's Section 106 procedure guidelines are standard tasks that must be conducted. However, there may be additional tasks necessary depending on the project location's history, soil types, landscape features, or expected resource types. Your consultant should be qualified to determine if any additional effort will be required to identify historic properties in your project's APE. Additional effort could include consultation with potentially interested parties, archaeological testing, ground penetrating radar, archival research at local repositories, etc. If you or your consultant are unsure, please contact me and we can discuss what could be considered a good faith effort for your project. The standard tasks in step 6 must be conducted and then summarized in a report of findings. The standard tasks include 1. Contacting the appropriate California Historical Resources Information Center and requesting a confidential record search. The record search must cover a search area comprising the APE and half-mile area perimeter of the APE. The Information Center will provide a report of historical resources data on file for the search area. Copies of all resource records within the APE must be requested as they will be included as part of your package to SHPO. 2. Conducting a pedestrian field survey of the APE and completing background research. Background research to compile the necessary historic context for any resource types identified or expected in your APE could include reviewing geoarchaeological and soils data, archival research, or reviewing historic aerial imagery or maps. The pedestrian survey should be conducted using transects of at most 15 meters. If this is impractical or impossible, the report must explain why. There should also be a discussion on any other methods used to identify historic properties during the field survey. If cultural resources are identified in the APE as part of the background research or record search, the pedestrian survey should attempt to relocate them and record their current conditions. This will be necessary to assess their integrity as part of their historic property evaluation. 3. Conducting outreach to interested parties. All tribal representatives listed on the NAHC contact list must be contacted by mail and email if they have not already been contacted. If no response is received within a few weeks, a follow-up telephone call must be made. And remember to document all of this in a tribal consultation log. As mentioned before, additional effort may be necessary depending on your project location and/or the results of the background research, field survey, or outreach. If any cultural resources over 50 years old are identified in your project's APE and they cannot be avoided by direct or indirect effects of the project, they will need to be evaluated to determine if they meet the definition of a historic property under Section 106. Typically, eligibility evaluations of built environment resources, such as old park buildings or structures, are done by professionally qualified architectural historians, while archaeological sites or features are evaluated for eligibility by professionally qualified archaeologists. Your consultant must include their eligibility evaluations on DPR 523 series record forms and summarized in the report. The last required task in step 6 is to determine the appropriate finding of effect for your project. Your consultant should be qualified to assess the project's effects on any historic properties in the APE. They must make the argument in the report that the project will have no effect, no adverse effect, or an adverse effect to historic properties. Make sure to put any questions you have in the chat, and I can address them after the section is complete. So step 7, the final step in this process is the consultant prepares a cover letter summarizing the level of effort and the recommended finding of effect, seeking concurrence from the SHPO. I'll send you a template shown on screen after your APE submittal is completed. It's been created based on previous consultations with SHPO for this program. The letter must contain a summary of the efforts to identify historic properties, including brief statements on the methods and results of the record search, outreach, field survey, and any other tasks completed as part of your study. You'll submit the draft letter to me for review, along with the report of findings, the outreach log, copies of all consultation documentation, the record search results, and all DPR 523 series records for resources in the APE. If I don't have any comments, I will submit the package to SHPO for concurrence. SHPO will typically respond within 30 days, but it may take up to 60 days depending on the complexity of the submittal. If they have comments or questions, the package will need to be revised and resubmitted. Once resubmitted, they will have another 30 to 60 days to respond and provide a concurrence letter. OGAL submits the concurrence letter to the National Park Service, which again is required before the project is deemed actionable for project approval and funding. So in the rare instance that your project results in an adverse effect to historic properties, additional consultation will be required with SHPO. Executing an agreement document with SHPO typically takes at least 1 year to complete, but rest assured I'll be there to help guide you every step of the way. So this is the end of the Section 106 portion of the presentation. I look forward to working with all of you, and I would be happy to meet with you one-on-one to answer any questions you may have about your project Section 106 compliance. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat and I'll address them shortly. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Kyle.
All right, thank you, Katie. I think we've been going here for about an hour. I think what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break. We'll come back in about 5 minutes and wrap up the A&R form. But yeah, 5-minute break. So we'll be back at 10:54. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. Natalie, were there any questions in the chat that you wanted to bring to anybody's attention? Or are we good to keep moving?
I think we're good to keep moving. It looks like everything's been addressed so far.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so lastly, section 4.0 amendments. This can be found on page 13 of the A&R form. All applicants are going to leave this section blank at this time. This section is completed only when an awarded project requires a scope change, a cost increase, or a time extension. So this does conclude the A&R form section. We again, you want to aim to have this form completed by the end of May in your section 6 by mid-April if you want to have a chance of getting funded this year with a potential start date with September. As soon as your federal requirements are complete, we're going to be sending those application packages to National Park Service on a flow basis. Therefore, really the sooner the Section 106 and the federal environmental analysis are complete, the sooner the project will receive the funding for approval. One thing to keep in mind is that there can be no ground disturbance at these project sites until the federal requirements are completed and the funding has been approved by NPS. So next, we're going to move on to the LWCF boundary map. This is required for all projects and shows the park area that will be protected in perpetuity, also known as forever, for outdoor recreation purposes. This document was attached to the email for your invite for this workshop, but it can also be found on the LWCF program webpage, and we shared a link, but we're going to share one right now in the chat. So your LWCF boundary map should look similar to the sample that's found at the bottom of the document. And it should be drafted on a document no larger than 11 inches by 17 inches. So this document can be submitted electronically, but it will be printed by NPS and should fit on an 11 by 17 inch paper. So if we start with number 1, we have the title of the map. Should follow the title formula here, and the title must be located at the top of the map. Number 2 is the LWCF boundary. So you're going to show the boundary of the land placed under LWCF protection. You're going to use red as the color indicator to show the boundary. So the colors that we're going to talk about do matter. You're going to include a scale of 1 inch equals, and you choose the length. Or you can provide the linear feet measure alongside each boundary line. Remember, the entire park must be placed under LWCF protection. Next is the assessor parcel numbers. We're going to show the assessor parcel numbers and the acreage for each parcel within the red LWCF boundary map. Use a black dash line to show or divide separate parcels, if applicable. The assessor parcel numbers and the acreage for each parcel can be listed on a separate page with a number key when there are so many that it's difficult to show them on the LWCF boundary map. Next is number 4, so the other rights and interests. Show the boundary of each right and interest in the land, such as easements, right-of-ways, lease agreements, deed lease restrictions, revisionary interests, etc., using purple font. So again, the colors do matter. Make sure you're following these colors, okay? Provide a list on a separate page of the LWCF boundary map that shows the detail of the rights and the interests that cannot be clearly shown on the boundary map. So you also want to attach an explanation about the purpose of each right and interest. Next is the current existing indoor structures. You're going to show the location and the boundary footprint of existing indoor structures. You can provide the square footage of the structure. You can attach an explanation of what the building is used for and, if applicable, future plans for its use, such as expansions. Next is the streets. We're going to show and label, provide the street names on the map and the adjoining streets surrounding the park, and that's going to be using black font. Next up, we want to see is the entry points in the park. If the park is gated, fenced, or a wilderness park, show the specific entry points for pedestrians and vehicles. Use black and labeled entry point. If the entire park boundary is considered an entry point for pedestrians, provide this statement on the map. Next, if you look on the bottom right of this, we have a north arrow. Provide a north arrow pointing to the north relative to the map layout, and that's going to be in black font. Now we've got the map figured out. Now below the map, we're going to identify the total acreage within the proposed LWCF boundary map within that red boundary per item 2 above. This acreage will be placed under federal protection and subject to post-completion park stewardship requirements. The acreage total must be consistent with the total park acreage identified on the application form. Next, we want the date of map preparation. Provide the date the map was developed. Then we've got our signature blocks. Provide the following signature blocks on the map. The authorized representative identified in the applicant's authorizing resolution must sign and date the map at the time of application. And then below it, we've got some certification language. So refer to the checklist for the required language under the signature blocks. If you got any questions about the LWCF boundary map, go ahead and put them into the chat feature. I'm now going to hand it over to Sochi for our final topic on acquisition. So this is for acquisition projects only. This is the UASFLA, also known as Yellow Book Standards, and she's going to use that terminology interchangeably. All right, Sochi.
Hi, thank you so much, Kyle. Okay, so let's go ahead and go over the page 45 of the application guide. So let's cover acquisition requirements, which can be found on page 45 and 46 in the LWCF application guide. Acquisition projects are bound by federal law relating to the valuation of real estate because LWCF is a federal funding source. LWCF acquisitions must have, for each parcel to be acquired, either an appraisal that includes all parcels by a qualified appraiser that meets the Yellow Book standards, and an independent appraiser's review certifying that the appraisal meets the Yellow Book standards, or documentation for the value using the waiver valuation method when the estimated property is less than $10,000. For all acquisitions, the fair market value established through the UASFLA appraisal or the value established through the waiver valuation method will be used to establish the amount eligible for the LWCF funding assistance. So the total project cost for an LWCF acquisition cannot be more than the fair market value. And this in turn affects the amount of the eligible for match. So including, the value of acquisitions by donation for match. If there are structures on the property to be acquired that do not support the outdoor recreation use of the site, reach out to the LWCF project officer assigned by your county to determine whether the value of these buildings are eligible to be included in the total project cost, or whether the site must be appraised and the value of the building structures removed from the grant. Okay, so the waiver valuation method. If the acquisition qualifies for the waiver valuation method, this means whether the estimated property value is less than $10,000, reach out to your project officer assigned by your county for guidance on the next steps. The UASFLA or Yellow Book appraisal, most projects will not qualify for the waiver valuation method. So for these projects, it's critical to select an appraiser familiar with the UASFLA and to do the appraisal, and a separate appraiser also familiar with the UASFLA for the independent appraiser's review. Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, USPAP, compliance alone will not result in the compliance. So UASFLA federal standards are considered supplemental standards to the 45 USPAP. The National Park Service's Federal LWCF manual has more information about the difference between these appraisals conducted according to the UASFLA and the USPAP. And you'll find the link in the chat for your reference. For the purpose of the UASFLA compliance, any appraisal report, whether it's identified by the appraiser as a self-contained report or a summary report, will be considered as meeting UASFLA requirements if it has been prepared in accordance with UASFLA. The UASFLA appraisal and independent review is required prior to submitting the payment request to OGALS. So please visit the appraisal unit page on the U.S. Department of Justice website for a full copy of the USFLA and/or Yellow Book standards. And the link is now in the chat. Thank you, Lydia. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Kyle to help wrap this up.
All right. Well, thank you, Sochi. So what comes next? As soon as the federal requirements are complete and all the required documents have been submitted to OGALS, we'll be sending those application packages to the National Park Service on a flow basis. So as a reminder, and we've said it a couple times, the sooner the Section 106 and the federal requirement analysis are complete, the sooner that your project can receive the federal funding approval. We do want to thank you for your participation today. We appreciate your work and your dedication. The team's going to remain available at this time to answer any final questions that you may have regarding the process. You can either put that into the chat or you can raise your hand and we can call on you. So yeah, again, we're here to help. We enjoy answering any questions you might have. Anybody have any questions?
If there's anyone who wants to ask their question, speaking, you're now able to unmute if you want to do that.
Oh, Gil, don't be scared to ask. We welcome your questions. Just go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on you.